The morning I finally felt like myself again. I was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of my condo on the 34th floor, watching the sun come up over Lake Ontario. Coffee in hand. Silk pajamas. Nothing on my calendar until noon. 3 years. It had taken me 3 years to get here, to a place where Sunday mornings felt quiet instead of shameful. 3 years since my family had made it very clear that I was, in their words, the one who chose herself over the family. As if that was a bad thing. I still remember the exact moment. It was Thanksgiving, the last one I went to. My brother had just announced that his landscaping business, the one my parents had quietly co-signed a $40,000 line of credit for without telling me, was having a rough patch. That was how my dad put it, a rough patch, like it was weather. Then he turned to me. I just accepted a senior analyst position at a Toronto-based investment firm. I had moved into my first real apartment in the Distillery District, small, but mine. I was, for the first time in my adult life, not behind on anything. And my dad looked at me across the turkey and the mashed potatoes and the good china my mother only brought out for company, and he said, "You're the stable one now. You can help your brother get back on his feet." Not a question. I said I needed time to think about it. By the time I drove back to the city that night, my mother had already texted me 4 times. The last message said, "Your brother would do it for you." I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and didn't respond. That was the beginning of the end. Within 2 weeks, I had become the villain of the family. My father told my aunt I had abandoned my brother during a crisis. My mother stopped calling. My brother, who had never once shown up to anything that mattered to me, not my convocation, not my first apartment, not a single birthday after I turned 19, texted me one single message, "You're selfish. I hope you know that." I read it twice. Then I blocked his number. I want to be honest about something. It hurt. It hurt in a way that I didn't fully understand at the time because it wasn't just about the money or the ask. It was about the fact that my entire worth to them had always been conditional. When I was struggling through university on OSAP and working 30 hours a week at a Shoppers Drug Mart, nobody co-signed anything for me. Nobody offered a soft loan. My dad told me, "Character is built through difficulty." I believed him. I built mine. And then, the moment I became useful, they presented me with a bill for the privilege of being their daughter. So I stopped answering. The first few months were the hardest. Not because I missed them. That grief was complicated, and I'll come back to it. But because the silence felt like confirmation of something I'd always been afraid was true, that without usefulness, I was forgettable. I threw myself into work. I made analyst of the quarter in my first full year. I started putting 15% of every paycheck into investments, something a mentor at work had pushed me to do. I picked up a short-term contract in addition to my main role and used every dollar of it to pay down my student loans ahead of schedule. I also, somewhere in the second year, started to feel genuinely okay. Not performed okay. Not the kind of okay you say at the dentist when they ask how you're doing. Real, cellular, Saturday morning coffee okay. I moved into a bigger place. I adopted a cat named Ptolemy who had strong opinions about where he was allowed to sit, which was everywhere. I took a solo trip to Newfoundland that changed something in me in a way I still can't fully articulate. Something about standing on the edge of the continent, eating fish and chips in the fog, feeling like the world was enormous and I was allowed to be in it. By the 3rd year, I had a promotion, a healthy savings account, and a condo I'd put a down payment on in a building that hadn't been finished yet. It was under construction. So was I, in the best possible way. I had told exactly one person in my family what I was doing. My aunt, my dad's older sister, who had always existed slightly outside the family's gravity. She lived in Halifax, called me every few months, and had the rare quality of listening without immediately trying to fix or redirect. She knew I was doing well. She didn't tell anyone else. I trusted her completely, which is how, I later found out, my mother eventually pieced things together. My aunt had mentioned casually that I was doing really well for myself in Toronto. She hadn't meant to say too much. But my mother, who had always been skilled at extracting information from conversations she was only peripherally involved in, had asked the right questions. And then, apparently, she'd done some light social media archaeology, found a photo I'd been tagged in at a colleague's housewarming, a colleague who lived in a very nice building in Yorkville, and concluded, incorrectly but not entirely without basis, that I was living there. I found out none of this until the day my parents showed up at my actual building. I was in the lobby, coming back from a run. I had headphones in and I was already mentally calculating whether I had time to shower before my afternoon call. And then I looked up, and there they were. My mother and father sitting on the bench near the mailboxes, both of them with roller suitcases beside them. My mother was wearing the coat she always wore to important things. My father was holding his phone with both hands the way he did when he was nervous. I took my headphones out very slowly. "Your aunt told us your address," my mother said, before I could speak. "We wouldn't have come if it wasn't serious." I stood there for a moment and did a very fast internal calculation. Lobby cameras, concierge 15 feet away, no immediate exit that wouldn't look like running. I made a decision. "Come upstairs," I said. "I want to be clear about something." The decision to let them in was not weakness, it was a choice I made with full awareness of what I was doing. I had learned over 3 years of building a life without them that I was not the same person who had driven home from that Thanksgiving dinner with her phone face down on the seat. I knew what I wanted from this conversation. I just needed to understand what they'd come to ask for before I decided how to give it to them. We rode up in the elevator in silence. My father looked at the ceiling. My mother looked at her hands. Ptolemy was sitting on the kitchen island when we walked in, and he stared at both of them with the specific indifference only cats and middle managers can truly achieve. My father looked around the condo. I watched him do it, the windows, the finishes, the view. I watched something shift in his face that I recognized from childhood, that particular recalibration he did when he realized he had underestimated something. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you," I said. "Why are you here?" My mother took a breath. It was the breath she took before hard conversations, the one that meant she'd rehearsed what came next. "Your brother is in trouble. Serious trouble this time." My brother had, apparently, spent the last 18 months expanding the landscaping business into equipment leasing, heavy-duty commercial equipment, excavators and loaders, stuff he'd financed to a private lender when the bank had said no. The business had lost 2 major contracts when a larger company undercut him on a municipal bid. He defaulted on the leases. The lender was not a bank, and therefore the process of collections had been faster and less forgiving than a bank would have been. He owed, my father told me, just under $90,000. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap. I didn't offer them any. "The house," my mother said. "We've talked to a lawyer. If we can't demonstrate we have the capacity to repay, they could go after the equity in the house." She looked at her hands. "We refinanced twice in the last 4 years. There isn't much left." I sat down across from them. "I need to understand something," I said. "When you co-signed his line of credit 4 years ago, the $40,000, did you use the house then too?" My father looked at the window. That was an answer. "And the refinances, both of them were for his business?" My mother said. "We were trying to help him get established." "I understand that," I said. "I meant it. I did understand it. I understood it the same way you understand a weather report for a city you don't live in anymore. What I'm asking is why I'm the solution." "Because you're family," my father said. There it was. The sentence with no logic in it. The sentence that was meant to function like a load-bearing wall if you didn't look too closely at what it was actually resting on. "I'm family," I repeated. "I'm the family that you stopped speaking to for 3 years because I didn't immediately agree to bail out my brother the first time." "That's not what happened." "Dad, I have every text message my mother sent me during that period. I have the voicemail you left me in January of that year where you told me I was a disappointment." My voice was steady. I had practiced this version of myself. Not cold, not cruel, just clear. I kept them, not out of spite, because I needed to know I wasn't misremembering. The room was very quiet. Ptolemy jumped off the island and disappeared into the bedroom. My father said, finally, "We made mistakes." I nodded. "You did. But that doesn't change the fact that your brother is going to lose everything." "His choices did that," I said. "Not mine." My mother looked up. "So you're going to do nothing?" "You have all of this," she gestured, vaguely, at the condo, at the view, at the life I had built, "and you're going to watch your family fall apart." I looked at her for a long moment. Here's the thing I did not say, but that I had said to myself many times in the months before this conversation. I did not become successful despite my family cutting me off. I became successful, partly because of it. The silence had removed a drain I hadn't fully understood was there. I had stopped spending emotional bandwidth on people who took more than they gave. I had stopped shrinking myself to fit into a family structure that had always made me feel like the spare tire, not the one you drove on, just the one you were glad was there when something went wrong. I was not going to loan them $90,000, but I was also not going to simply throw them out because I had a better idea. I stood up. "Give me a few days," I said. "Let me talk to my financial advisor. I want to understand what options actually exist before anyone makes any decisions." My mother's face softened. My father exhaled. They had come in expecting a fight, and they had gotten something that looked like consideration. I could see them reclassifying me in real time, from the daughter who had abandoned them to the daughter who was, perhaps, coming around. I booked them a hotel. Not a bad one. A Marriott in Etobicoke, 20 minutes away. My father started to say they could stay at my place, and I said, very pleasantly, "I have an early morning tomorrow. The hotel has a pool. You'll be comfortable." I said it in a way that made it clear it wasn't a negotiation. After they left, I called my aunt in Halifax. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. There was a long pause on her end. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Your mother called me last week and I mentioned you were doing well. I didn't realize she was going to—" "It's okay," I said. "It's fine. Actually, I need your help with something." My aunt was a retired paralegal. She had spent 30 years in family and estate law before moving to Halifax to be closer to her partner's family. She knew contracts. She knew what was enforceable and what wasn't, what a collection process looked like, and, most importantly, she knew what it meant when someone co-signed a debt they couldn't cover. I explained what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That would work. It would absolutely work. But are you sure you want to do it that way?" "Yes," I said, "because it's honest. I'm not lying to anyone. I'm just making sure everyone understands what they're agreeing to." She told me what she needed me to prepare. I spent the next 2 days doing exactly that. Here's what I had figured out. My parents' instinct in coming to me was not entirely irrational. There was one way I could technically help them. I could buy the debt. Not give them money, purchase the private lender's claim against my brother's business at a discount, which the lender might agree to given that they were looking at a long, difficult collections process on a business with diminishing assets. It was legal. It was, in certain circles, a normal financial instrument. It would make the lender whole enough that they'd walk away, and it would transfer the debt to me, which meant my brother would then owe me. Not my parents, me. I was not doing this out of cruelty. I want to be precise about that. I was doing it because it was the only version of this transaction that was honest. If my parents wanted my help, they were going to get my help, structured as a formal financial arrangement, not a gift to be forgotten later or used as leverage. My brother was going to repay the debt, with a proper repayment schedule and a legal agreement, or he was not going to have access to his parents' house equity as collateral while pretending it was a family favor. I called a financial lawyer I had worked with through my firm. She looked at what I was proposing and said it was straightforward. We drafted the agreement in a day and a half. The morning I invited my parents back to my condo, I made coffee. Real coffee, not the instant stuff. I set 3 mugs on the kitchen table and I put the documents in a folder beside mine. My mother walked in looking hopeful. My father walked in looking like a man who had been up too late worrying about something he couldn't control. I waited until they were both sitting. "I have a way to help," I said. "But I need you to hear all of it before you respond." I walked them through it. The debt purchase. The transfer. The repayment schedule I was proposing for my brother, structured over 8 years, with a modest interest rate, with a clause that allowed for early repayment. I had written in a provision that suspended repayment for up to 6 months in the event of documented hardship, because I am not a collection agency and I was not interested in making my brother's life impossible. I just wanted it to be real. My father was frowning by the time I finished. "So you'd own his debt," he said. "Yes. And if he doesn't pay, then I have the same options any creditor has, which are significant but which I have no intention of using unless he makes it necessary." I folded my hands on the table. I'm not doing this to punish him. I'm doing this so that there's accountability, so that this isn't the 3rd time money gets shuffled around in this family with no record, no agreement, and no consequences when it goes sideways. My mother looked like she wanted to say something and then didn't. "The alternative," I said quietly, "is that I don't help at all. And I want to be honest, that's still on the table. I am not obligated to do this. I'm choosing to do it because I don't want you to lose your house, even after everything, but I need this to be structured correctly or I'm not involved." Another silence. My father picked up the document. He read through it. He read slowly, the way he always had. The way he used to read contracts at the kitchen table when I was small and I'd sit across from him doing homework. The memory arrived and I let it come and I let it pass. He put the document down. "This seems reasonable," he said. Which, from my father, was about as close to thank you as it got. My mother said, "What about us, the cosign?" "That gets released when the private lender is paid out," I said. "Your lawyer can confirm that. Once I purchase the debt, your liability ends." She exhaled slowly. Something in her shoulders dropped. I slid the folder toward my father. "My lawyer will need his signature as well, and yours, as cosigners, to confirm you understand the terms of the transfer." "And your brother," my mother said. "Does he know about this?" "Not yet," I said. "I thought it made sense to talk to you first." My father signed. My mother signed. They looked, both of them, like people who had just survived something they didn't entirely understand yet. I sent the documents to my lawyer that afternoon. She coordinated with the private lender over the following week. The lender, facing a complicated and expensive collections process, agreed to settle the debt at a discounted rate that I won't specify, but that was fair. The day the transfer went through, I called my brother. He answered on the fourth ring, which I had expected. His voice had that specific flat quality it got when he was braced for something. "Hey," I said. "Hey." Short pause. "I bought your debt," I said. "From the lender. I want you to know you're not dealing with them anymore. You're dealing with me. I've had a repayment schedule drawn up. Your parents have already seen it. A copy will come to you by registered mail." I paused. "You'll want to read it." A very long silence. "Why would you do that?" he said finally. "Because they were going to lose the house," I said. "And because I'm not interested in watching this family fall apart over something that has a solution." "After everything," he started. "Yes," I said. "After everything." He didn't say thank you. I hadn't expected him to. He said he'd look at the paperwork. I told him my lawyer's contact information was included. Then I said goodbye and ended the call. I stood at the window for a long time after that. Lake Ontario was gray-green and enormous in the afternoon light. Ptolemy appeared and pushed his head against my ankle, which was the most affection he usually permitted before retreating to a chair. I picked him up anyway, and he let me. Here is what nobody tells you about families like mine. The harm is never one big thing. It's the accumulation of 100 small surrenders they asked for and you gave, until one day you realize you've been operating on a deficit for years and nobody noticed because the transaction was invisible. There was no single moment where my parents were villains. There were 100 moments where they were simply not paying attention, and I was simply not demanding they do. I'd stopped demanding, and then I had stopped showing up altogether. And in the silence, I had learned, slowly, and then all at once, that I was fine, that I had always been fine, that the version of me they found that morning in the lobby of my building was not a new person. She was just the original one, with better boundaries and a higher floor. The paperwork my brother received included one clause that nobody commented on, but that I had put there deliberately. It was a waiver, signed by me. It stated that if the full amount of the debt was repaid within 5 years, I would forgive the remaining interest, which, depending on when he paid, could amount to several $1,000s. I put it there because I didn't want to be a creditor who made money off her brother's failure. I wanted to be someone who had been hurt and had healed and had chosen, with full information and absolutely no illusions, to remain in relationship with her family on terms that were honest. My mother called me 2 weeks later, not to talk about the money, just to talk. She asked about my job. She asked about the condo. She asked, a little awkwardly, if I ever came out to Barrie anymore, and I said sometimes, and she said maybe at Christmas, and I said maybe. It's not a fairy tale. I know that. There is no version of the story where the years of silence unhappen or the hurt resolves neatly into a lesson. I don't have a relationship with my parents that looks like what I see on other people's holiday Instagram posts. I probably never will, but I have a relationship that I chose, on terms I set, with the security of knowing that the next time my father sits across from me at a table, I won't be wondering what I'm worth to him. I already know. I have it in writing. I've thought a lot about what made the difference, not in the outcome, but in me. because the version of me who drove home from that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago would not have been able to sit calmly across a kitchen table from her parents and explain the terms of a debt purchase. She would have cried, or capitulated, or overcorrected into cruelty. She would have done almost anything except what I actually did, which was just tell the truth clearly and without apology. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from 3 years of very quiet, very unglamorous work, paying down debt on a spreadsheet at 11 on a Tuesday night, choosing, over and over, not to reach back when every instinct said to, learning, slowly in the way you only learn things that actually stick, that I was responsible for my own stability and that nobody else was coming to provide it. There's something I want to say about my brother because I think it's the part people misunderstand. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he made a long series of choices without ever being asked to sit with the consequences, because there was always someone willing to absorb them first. My parents absorbed them. Then they came to me to absorb the overflow. That's not cruelty on their part. It's a pattern that had simply never been interrupted. I interrupted it, not by refusing to help, but by helping in a way that required accountability. That's the part that felt like integrity to me, not punishing him, not making a dramatic scene, just insisting that the transaction be honest. I think about the waiver I included in the contract, the one that forgives the remaining interest if he repays early. I put it there because I didn't want to spend the next 8 years being someone who extracted money from her brother. I wanted to be someone who had drawn a clear line and then, having drawn it, remained a decent person on the other side of it. Those two things are not in conflict. You can hold people accountable and still wish them well. You can protect yourself without becoming the villain of someone else's story. My mother calls more regularly now. The conversations are still a little careful. The way conversations are when people are relearning how to be around each other after a long time. She asked me once, about 6 weeks after everything was settled, if I was angry at her. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said, not anymore. That was true. The anger had been real and I had felt it completely, and then it had done what anger does when you actually let yourself feel it. It moved through and it left. What stayed was something quieter. A kind of clarity about what I needed from relationships and what I wasn't willing to accept. I don't think I'm wiser than anyone else who has been through something like this. I think I just got lucky in a specific way of having 3 years of silence that forced me to figure out who I was without the noise of other people's expectations filling in all the space. That's what the distance gave me, not strength in some grand cinematic sense, just enough quiet to hear myself think. And from that, everything else followed.